Right, we're going to now kick off our first session with a topic that I think interests everybody in the room here. We're going to talk about real-world data and evidence. So I'm really pleased to welcome our speaker this afternoon, who is Anna Amarayuti. She's joining us from We Can, which is embedded within the European Patient Advocacy Institute. So Anna is a cancer survivor herself, and she also brings a background in research. So I think those are the perfect ingredients to equip her very well to speak on this topic. She's joining us from Germany today. So thank you so much, Anna, and we'll hand over to you.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. So on today's presentation, I will give a brief introduction to real-world data and evidence, types of real-world data that patient organization and patient representatives can collect, how can this data be collected, and how it can be used to lead to impact. So a straightforward way to access health of a population is usually by looking at the mortality, life expectancy, and morbidity. And the global burden of disease assessment carried out across the world showed that the largest burden comes from cardiovascular disease, and it is immediately followed by cancer. So how can we identify and meet the needs of this underserved population? And it is mainly by collecting, analyzing, and interpreting evidence, which leads us to gather robust information to validate or reject a hypothesis, to improve the efficiency and effectiveness, to predict outcomes, inform decision-making, provide information on quality of life, enhance credibility, and reduce uncertainty. And there are different ways, either qualitative and quantitative, in which we can gather evidence. And this is either through research, through observation, through desktop research, expert testimonies, historical records, comparative analysis, or by collecting anecdotal evidence. In order to look at evidence, we usually assess the patient needs, either from a qualitative or quantitative perspective. And actually what evidence is represents the insights gained after analyzing real-world data. Evidence is a systemic, scientifically grounded, and methodologically informed way in which we can approach actually patient advocacy. And it tends to shift from sharing a personal story to proposing change based on research and verifiable information, which then leads to influencing decisions more effectively. So evidence enhances our credibility. It helps us develop an understanding of the patient needs and develop good practice, ensures transparencies and holds stakeholders accountable for their decisions, is optimizing the resource utilization, and it has a greater impact. And there is a lot of data that we can use for gathering evidence, but perhaps two of the main types of data that start to be collected more and more by patient organizations are patient-reported outcomes and patient preference data. Both of these types of data represent patient experience data that highlights the perspectives from patients on condition, treatment, and the impact of healthcare. And both the EMA and FDA provide guidance on how patient experience data should be collected and provided, and it highlights that it should be methodologically sound, and both the EMA and FDA highlight the importance of engaging with the patient community in developing the way in which we collect, generate, and analyze this data. So patient experience data helps us capture symptoms, disease effects, care path, treatment outcomes, and health status. And there are different types of patient experience data. There are the patient-reported outcomes, patient preference studies, patient-reported experience measures, health-related quality of life assessments, symptom diaries, treatment adherence reports, data on physical, emotional, and social well-being. And what information this data provides relates to the preference in regards to the treatment, the efficacy, the safety, the acceptability and tolerability of potential side effects, the side effects that patients experience, as well as the day-to-day reality of living with a health condition. However, to implement the collection of patient experience data, it requires a lot of planning, establishing systems for data collection, training personnel into interpreting this data, and integrating actually the results into practice. And most of all, it requires a cultural shift to value and prioritize patients' insights as highly as any other data collected either by healthcare professionals or industry stakeholders. And it requires a paradigm shift towards a more empathetic, effective, and efficient care. So I will focus on patient-reported outcomes. This is one of the most commonly used type of patient experience data. It's captured through patient-reported outcomes measures, PROMs, which represent validated instruments such as questionnaires and diaries. PROMs are filled by patients themselves as a self-report, and they provide subjective information such as pain, fatigue, nausea, physical functioning, adherence, satisfaction, and preference. PROMs can be either generic or disease-specific. The generic ones fail to capture relevant disease-specific aspects, but the data can be comparable with data from the general population. And some examples of generic PROMs are the Euro Quality of Life 5 or the PROMIS. And then there are the disease-specific PROMs, which provide quantification of the impact of the particular condition only. And for example, here we would make use of the EORTC QLQC 30 survey. But either choosing generic or disease-specific, we can actually use both, but it's important to select fit-for-purpose PROMs based on the objectives and consider also combining them. Patient preference studies, also a type of patient experience data, tend to indicate what patients are willing to accept, desire when giving multiple treatment alternatives. They complement the safety and efficacy data, and it gives us a lot of insights in regards to adherence. It gives information on what outcomes are a priority for patients. And patient preference studies can be revealed preferences, where we're observing real-world choices and behaviors. And usually this type of patient preference studies are used for products that are already on the market. And stated preferences, which are hypothetical experiments where we choose between X and Y, which are two hypothetical drugs. And this is one of the most used patient preference methods. For patient preference studies, we usually do discrete choice experiments, threshold technique, best-worst scaling, as well as interview, focus groups, workshop, or even open-ended surveys. So patient experience data truly has the potential to fully capture the impact of care by looking at the outcomes, whether the protocols that are developed are patient-friendly. It actually helps in enhancing recruitment. It creates the care in a more patient-centric way. It provides information on the safety and effectiveness of the drugs, and it also ensures that the patient voice is captured in regulatory processes, decisions, and it also reflects the value and the preferences that patients have. And one important aspect is that, as it was already highlighted, cultures, nations, religions, and people are not rocks, and they're in constant transformation, and we need to be sensitive to that. So ongoing patient experience data collection allows for continual refinement. So how would we collect patient experience data or any type of real-world data? It's first by defining a hypothesis or a research question that we want to answer, by involving patients, experts, researchers, statisticians, and any other stakeholders that are relevant, defining the methodology and considering the N number that we should be having either for the survey or for the interview, and implementing the project as well as considering the IT or ethical requirements that we might have. Following on this, we would be doing the data analysis, summarizing the findings, checking whether the conclusions are correct, and then presenting, reporting, or publishing them. So this is just to show the steps and the tasks that would be involved at every single step. And this is actually one of the slides is taken from the WCAN training course on evidence-based advocacy, which I will be highlighting towards the end of the presentation. So there are different ways. We can either survey to collect real-world data, or we can interview patients. The advantage of the survey is that we can either create our own or use existing validated questionnaires, or we can even select questions from a survey library. And then with the interview, they're great, and actually they provide a lot more insight than a survey, but they require a lot of time and proper analysis. Or we can always consider using a mixed approach where we are combining the survey technique with open questions, which allows us to also gather insights similar to in an interview. Regardless of the method, I think setting the questions is probably one of the hardest tasks, as it involves us paying attention to the wording, order of items, formatting, display, and translations. So in terms of pros and cons, for the survey, they're very helpful for quantifying known issues and getting statistically significant results. However, they can be very expensive to carry out. We can have sampling bias. For example, if not all the patients have access to internet to answer our survey, if we're only considering online format. And also, it's really important to know that not everything that matters can be measured through a survey, and not everything that can be measured really matters for patients. With the interviews, they're extremely helpful for identifying unknown issues, so we become aware of the patient needs. Sometimes they can have actually a bigger impact in advocacy, and we can inquire about details on aspects, for example, how does something feel, which we wouldn't be able to quantify in a survey. However, they can be very expensive, similar to the surveys, but they take a lot of time and it is harder to do the analysis. And it all usually involves a smaller number of participants, which reduces also the significance and how your data is seen from the outside. Some takeaways in regards to survey, interviews, or using the mixed approach. I think it's really important to keep the questions focused and short, and not to include questions that ask more than one thing. It is important to consider how you're putting the questions in order, how you're formatting, and whether you would require translations. And if you are requiring translation, it is worth involving multilingual research teams from the beginning. And then once you have the survey ready, to test the questions and the order and actually gather feedback from the patient community, and consider how long it takes for them to complete the survey. As a patient organization, some overall considerations would be in regarding to the capacity. Does your patient organization have the capacity and the project lead to do such a project? Do they have the capability, or do you have to look for external expertise? Do you have the funding secured and also applied for the ethical approval? Do you have the team to design the research and also the publication strategy to incorporate the diverse viewpoints for comprehensive analysis? And in terms of logistics, someone to always keep an eye on the deadline, and also identify how you will use the data and the results, and for who are you generating this data, because it will be very different if you're just publishing the data or if you're using it, for example, for influencing decisions. And in terms of organizational aspects, it's really important to determine the responder quantity and the demographics, to identify from the beginning who is your target population and subgroup, and whether there are specific countries for outreach in which you need to put more effort in, but also consider the time commitment for the patient interaction. However, there are options in which you do not have to generate by yourself this own data. And here I put a few platforms which provide data mostly from clinical trials, which usually means that you actually have to clean the data, but you can actually get a lot of data that you can use for advocacy. And apart from these 4 data sources, you can always make use of electronic health records, patient registries, claims, as well as information from wearable devices that, for example, even patients can provide directly to the patient organization. So what is the relevance of real-world data? Well, for patients, it provides a way in which care can be more personalized and in line with their preferences, and it can address their specific unmet needs. It can increase satisfaction, it improves adherence of the patients to the treatment. It fosters trust between the patient and the healthcare providers. And for patient organizations, it enables us to act on evidence and advocate for access, funding, policy changes based on data. For industry, It helps them determine the patient values, the experiences, and what outcomes are relevant for the patients. It helps them in product development to ensure that it is in line with real-world patient needs and unmet medical gaps. It offers them insights into effectiveness and safety of drugs. It adds values to the interventions, and it supports the choices between two medicines that may have similar efficacy. For healthcare providers and systems, it informs the spectrum of care, management strategies. It helps choose the best care for the patients. It helps them understand how lifestyle and comorbidities affect care. It enhances the quality of care, meaning that the number of adverse events is reduced, as well as the hospitalization period. It optimizes resource utilization and allocation, and it helps them implement shared decision-making. For policymakers, this data is more and more used and accepted for approval of new drugs. It helps them determine the cost-effectiveness of drugs. It helps with access decisions, as well as aids in medicines reimbursements. It's guiding the funding allocations and aids in building guidelines that reflect real-world effectiveness of treatments. And then once a drug is on the market, it can provide ongoing data in regards to the safety and efficacy of the drug. Furthermore, the real-world data can be used for drug repurposing as it helps identify new uses. Once we have the real-world data, we can actually note patterns, treatment outcomes, and identify benefits of the drug for other conditions. And furthermore, such data helps in quicker access as it shows how the drug performs in the real world, shows whether the patients prefer the drug. And we already have data from ongoing clinical trials, and it is cost-effective. So what do you do if all this data that you have generated or the data that you have access to sometimes doesn't lead to impact? Well, Mark Twain said that no amount of evidence will ever persuade an idiot. But actually, evidence will persuade in most of the time. And the reason why it might not persuade, it could be because of cognitive dissonance, where we're ignoring evidence because it contradicts deeply held belief. Or, sadly, because we provided low-quality data that is not robust or recent enough, or we have a low N number. And at that point in time, it's also important to consider whether our message was tailored to the audience, whether we could find a way to simplify and visualize perhaps the data, whether we actually need only to connect with whom we're trying to communicate the data, and also whether we address, when we share the data, the biases and the limitations. And throughout the process, I think it's really important to evolve, adapt, and reframe. So I hope that I managed to convince you that real-world data and evidence ensures that health services, by using them, health services are tailored to meet unique patient needs. It enhances the outcomes, strengthens the care, promotes transparency, accountability, and trust. And by employing desktop quantitative or qualitative research for evidence, we can actually advocate systemically and scientifically for change. And Albert Einstein said that imagination is actually the highest form of research. So I think irrespective of whether we're using data to advocate, we should always try to be creative. And I want to leave you with a metaphor. So currently we are creating high-performance sports cars, testing them on racetracks and controlled environments to demonstrate how speedy and safe these cars are. We then take this high-performance car across the normal streets, or I can say across the streets of Romania. I can say bad things about Romania because I'm from Romania, where they're really, really bad. And then the performance and efficiency of the car is affected in the real world. The driver is frustrated with the experience he has, and even though the driver could have told the manufacturers what suspension adjustments he would need to drive that car in Romania, no one asked him, and this data was not collected. So the data that we currently have and we collect may be comprehensive for scientists and regulators, but it does not account for variables encountered into daily practice, and it does not provide insights on what patients value, prefer, what's their experience, and how can we meet their needs in the real world. And if you're interested to actually learn more about this, on weekend, we have 3 courses and projects. The first 2 are courses. There is the Patient in Publication course that highlights how patient representatives and patient organizations can be involved in publishing data, and the Evidence-Based Advocacy online training course, which provides good oversight on how to collect, generate, and analyze data. And also there is the Weekend Academy, which takes place every year in summer, and this year it will be in July. And if you're interested in participating, you can either ask Mihi or me while I'm still here about opportunities to engage. So thank you very much. And as the image highlights, everyone can work in science and generate data and use the data in the benefit of the patients. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. So we'll open up. We have half an hour for some questions and discussion now, but I think we should also actually tell you who we are. So I'm Sorrel Bickley. I'm a member of the SPAGN board, and I also work for Sarcoma UK as the Director of Research Policy and Support. And I'm joined by...
And I'm Christina Iptoma, and I am I'm the Director of Scientific Programs for MIB Agents Osteosarcoma Alliance, which is a nonprofit based in the U.S., and super happy to be here. And I think we can open it up for if anyone has any questions for Anna. That was a lovely, very comprehensive discussion on real data. Thank you. Is there a microphone? Okay, I might kick it off with a question for you. So I'm wondering for enrollment and kind of reaching out to patients to engage them in research, any thoughts on kind of the best channel for that, whether it's engaging directly with patients or through advocacy organizations or maybe through the healthcare provider? Kind of just pros and cons of each and kind of where you might have seen most success?
This one is working as well. So we actually, in Weekend, we're trying to start a patient experience data survey to collect evidence. And we actually had this conversation with healthcare professionals, with researchers and patient organizations. When they're disseminating a survey and collecting data, what numbers do they actually have? And the highest numbers of patient-collected data is actually originating from patient organizations, which have thousands of respondents. So I would say it is actually through patient organizations that most of the data is collected.
I think we've got a question at the back.
Does that work? Yes. I was just wondering, obviously, a lot of the patient advocacy groups here will vary in size. Some of them will be very small. There'll just be a few people who are trying to get something going in their country, and they would like to gather evidence. Is there a place, or are there existing questions that have been created on questionnaires that could be redeployed by other groups so that you don't have to start with a blank piece of paper?
Yes, so on that, for example, if you want questions that are already validated, there is the URTC question library, where you just go and pick the questions that are relevant for you, and then you include them in your survey. Or alternatively, you can make use of questions and surveys already developed by patient organizations, and most of them are actually willing to share them, so you can adapt them for your own disease-specific area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
As people begin to collect data off over different platforms, can you kind of adjust the challenges of how we might harmonize some of that? Because we continue to ask patients sometimes several times, and if we don't begin to figure out how to harmonize, I think it's a bit of a burden as we have people continue to repeat the information. So have you dealt with that or addressed some of that?
So that was one of the conversations that we actually had in weekend as well. And I think it is really difficult currently to harmonize. And it is difficult not to overburden patients with multiple surveys. Honestly, from my perspective, I still didn't find a solution. There might be more experienced patient advocates in the room that might have figured out a solution. From a researcher and fresh patient advocate perspective, I would say it is probably one of our biggest challenges, and where we're kind of like failing the patients because we do not identify a way in which not to overwhelm them with the same questions over and over again.
Thank you for a lovely talk. I'm doing some work with a unit at Birmingham University, which is looking at the way that patient-reported outcome measures are actually acquired from patients. The critical issue that's coming through is this one of burden that you've just mentioned. And I know that from studies, clinical studies that I've been involved with, which have had patient-reported measures within them, quite often it's 2 or 3 questionnaires. For example, one we're using the Toronto Extremity score, which measures the functioning following surgery on the limbs. We're looking at the QLQC30 to look at the overall quality of life and the context within that. And we're looking at the EQ5D because that's what the regulators want to see for the cost effectiveness of an outcome and to whether it's then introduced into clinical use. Now, that's 3 questionnaires with a total between them of something like 45 questions. And that's being asked 3 times in less than a year. Each of those sessions are just answering questionnaires takes over an hour. And you have to have all the questions answered, otherwise you have gaps in the data, and that's not helpful for the later analysis. So you're creating a burden on the patients and building the potential for reluctance amongst patients to even go into answering the 3rd set of questionnaires. They just don't want to do it, and yet it's essential in the design of the study that happens. So how do you handle that sort of issue where you have competing requests for different purposes, needing all those extra questions, and yet difficult to get?
Very challenging question. I'm hoping that in time we will be able to address this by actually having patient-reported outcome information and data collected in a digital manner without patient having to provide the input by hand or through an interview or through a survey. So ideally, with the rise of the artificial intelligence, that this will be captured without the patient inputting it by hand.
I'm totally convinced that patient organizations are able to collect evidence and also collect data. I think that that's the future, that we also need to support our advocacy issues with evidence. What about, I would call it, the prejudice by researchers or by the regulators that these data are coming from patient organizations and that this data is not, I would call it, scientific correct or something like this. So how to handle this in the future? I'm maybe a little bit provocative, but this could be the reality, because sometimes investigators or doctors, physicians think that they are the only ones who can collect data, and maybe the regulators are on this trip that say only if doctors collect these data, this is the right way.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and I think it will take time for them to recognize that we have the capacity and ability, but also for us as patient organizations to build the knowledge on how to statistically analyze the data and to provide it in a way that it is understandable for them and not in a raw format, for example. And I think if we think about it, it's somehow similar with, I'm going to take a very far away example. It's very similar to IVF procedures that in the beginning we were very restrictive towards them, and we thought it's something that it's not natural, and then we accepted them. And I think it's going to be the same with patient-reported data coming from patient organizations. We're seeing them as something new and that we're not used to, and then in time it will be something that we're accepting.
I have another question about the questionnaires. It is very important to have representative results. And therefore, we also need to have representative sample of replies to questionnaires. This is not an easy task. My experience is also from SPAGN that in the questionnaires that we have sent, even if we had a very nice response, there is quite a bias in the response. It's mostly higher educated people, and in terms of gender, it's mostly the women that respond. Even in terms of, let's say, 40%, 60% women, 40% men, or even worse. Do you have suggestions how we can improve that?
Similar to what I previously said, I think it's on our side to change that, because as you already said, we identify the populations that do not respond. We identify that we're only deploying the survey, for example, online, but that there are populations that are not technical, or they do not want to spend after a working day that they spent on their computer to spend another 1 hour to complete a survey on the computer. So how can we reach them? Is it through a phone interview? Is it by deploying the survey or the questionnaire in the waiting room while they're waiting for their follow-up or for their medical appointment? And I think when we're designing the survey, we should think, who is our target population? Where do they spend most of their time? How do they spend most of their time? What do they do, for example, when they're in the bus? Can we actually put the QR codes, I do not know, in the bus so that they scan it, and while they're on the bus, they complete the survey? So I think it's by identifying what's the pattern of that particular population that we're not reaching, and identifying how we can force them to answer the survey. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
I have another suggestion, because you mentioned questionnaires as one of the ways to get the data that we need. I think there's another potential source for very important data. When we do questionnaires, we get data that we ask for. And we don't get the data that we didn't ask for. And we don't know what we miss, because we are not completely sure what is really important to the patient. There is another way, and that is listening to what people talk about. And you can go to, for instance, Facebook groups or in general patient forums on the internet. That is for many patients an important place to share their experience, to have contact with other patients, to support each other. And that's where they express on a daily basis what they experience and what is important to them. And I think that is a very valuable source of data that we increasingly will have to consider, I think. And we have the tools coming to us to do something with those discussions.
I want to second that So I come from a low middle income country where we have a number of challenges when doing it. So most data collection, researchers think, oh, we'll create a survey and then we'll put it online and then we'll let everyone fill it in. What they forget is that the data from low to middle income countries cannot be collected that way. First of all, the people don't have the access to the internet. They don't have the access to a smartphone. They don't have the access to the literacy to actually read it. Where they might have health literacy, they don't have access to literacy to read it. And they also don't have the time insofar as travel and life's impact on survival, which allows us as patient groups to carry the burden of this. For us to answer and get questionnaires answered, we have to physically go into the treatment facilities, have someone sit with that person, read the question out, and fill in that person's thing. Now that speaks to a huge amount of resource that is done on that. And I want to say that there is, I second what was said, that, you said that, researchers, we need to start looking at how we up our game and create our evidence-based and how we collect our evidence. But also researchers have to understand what the lifestyles and are happening with the people that are targeting. Otherwise, they're simply just not going to get that information. And if they're okay with not having that information, with having high income, predominantly female, white people, data, and that's considered real world evidence, and that's great, but it's not truly real world evidence. 2/3 of the world's population live in the conditions I've experienced, and I wonder how we as advocates will start to advocate to say that the way that the research fraternity is looking at collecting data needs to be rethought as well.
Sure. Yeah. I think this is more a comment just on, Denise, you were talking about burden with patients and harmonizing. In the conversations you're having and the way the world is going, has there ever been any considerations or talks around AI and being able to kind of harmonize this data into this machine learning, right? And then when these questions keep coming, the same questions and this kind of burden that Roger was speaking of, that, these questions could be, brought through by this kind of new AI, well, I guess it's not that new, but always emerging AI technology. And just wondering if you've been in any conversations that have been around that area of work.
Not really. And I think what was highlighted when these conversations were emerged about AI and AI assisting with the harmonization, but also with the fact that we could share the data so that we do not ask every single patient organizations the same questions to potentially the same patients. It was the privacy and confidentiality issues that we're still not sure how to deal with that in regards to AI. And the other aspect that I wanted to highlight, but now I forgot. Yes, it was that by us doing it the same way, we're actually not diversifying anymore. If we're harmonizing the questions, then we're asking all the same thing. And then what they were afraid of and what was suggested in that conversation was that we're not going to reach all the people because the questions will be designed in such a way that we're reaching the majority, but not also the minority of the population that is able to understand the questions differently, for example, and that they will perceive the questions differently. So somehow it is good that every single patient organization is collecting this data in different ways. What is the minus? It is the burden, and also that we cannot actually compare the data and we cannot put it together, I think.
I'm just wondering, speaking on that, if, I mean, that's the challenge, right? We're all collecting data and we're all keeping it separately. And so one of the challenges, and that's where AI would come in, is even if we're asking different questions, that it's able to then kind of parse out the answers to those questions. But it's also the challenge that we're all asking questions, and they're usually the same questions, especially in sarcoma, and we're all collecting this information, and then we're not sharing it. And so there might be a world in which, especially with SPAGN, that while we're all out here collecting information, there's a world in which we gather that information together. So then we may not have all the representation because of the challenges that some countries have, but we'll have more representation than we have right now.
Thank you. I think we all recognize that we need to collect data. We need to do it together. And it's a huge challenge. Maybe we should take a lesson from Iceland that collects data from birth through death. And I wonder how they do that, and they do it successfully. One of the issues I always talk about is it would be great to get data worldwide from everybody and every person in every organization involved. What do you do in terms of quality control and making sure that data is good data? Because if you don't have good data, it's worthless. So your thoughts?
I think this is perfectly in line with what was already mentioned in regards to the AI, because what we're going to feed the AI is what we're going to get out of the AI. So if we're feeding the AI low quality data, that's what we're going to get out of it. That's what it's going to learn, low quality. I do not know how to address the challenge of low quality data, I do not have the background, to be very honest with you. So my background is on biomedical science, and I worked with mice. With mice, I knew which one was unhealthy and disregarded that one from the data. I do not know how to do this for humans. I really do not know. That's my honest answer.
Can you hear me now? So one question we had around was data and getting people involved and how to get them involved. I think there's an aspect that we don't really do, which is share the results back with the person that has provided those results. You share the results, you'll get more. So there's a behavioural kind of aspect that we need to look at. But equally, some of the conversations around bringing data together through a more harmonised way, I think pharma generally have been quite successful with that. And it's kind of looking at the privacy agreements. My background is digital and pharma. So that's something I wouldn't mind if you want to have a chat with me about it. I can see what we can look at. But I think we really do need to start getting into this area of starting to share the data back so you get it on board. But equally, an area in digital, which I think we are very much more conscious of, is digital literacy, health literacy, but also digital deprivation and where that's getting involved or having issues. So having people actively ask questions, has this been tested with digital apps on certain demographics? For example, things around VR around stroke. Active questions, are you picking patients from private clinics, or have you tried this with somebody who doesn't have English as a first language? You know, actively asking those questions to then see on who it does work with. And actively pushing, I think, is a way I think some of the more developed nations could be also contributing to kind of this digital data, especially the data, deprivation that we have at the moment.
I really loved the way that you introduced that concept, Anna, of kind of real world data driving this paradigm shift towards more empathetic care. And I think that's a lovely way to describe it. But it made me think, do we have any success stories? Maybe not from the world of sarcoma, but more broadly, of where real world data has really made a big change, and we can use that to kind of inspire this bigger picture around the conversations that we have.
I think there are actually multiple patient organizations, and within WeCan, we're now designing the patient experience data course, and we had some case study presentations from numerous patient organizations sharing how patient-reported outcomes and patient preference studies managed to change HTA decisions, managed to help design awareness campaigns. So I think the data has a lot of power, and it is on us to make use of it instead of just holding it on our PCs.
Any other questions? Any other?
No, we can just say a huge thank you to Anna for kicking us off in the conference, and to all of you for an excellent set of questions and interactions. Thank you. Now coffee. We're back in half an hour.
Yeah.